Bethesda has announced an official company policy to only provide review copies of their games to media one day before the game is launched. This got me thinking about the business side of consumer information, or the lack thereof. Let's chat about it in the comments below, but first, my opinion. I'm Tarmack, and this is Feature Creep. In economics, there's a phenomenon called asymmetry of information, which in essence is a description of what happens to markets where consumers are provided extremely low levels of information about products available in that market. This has a direct linkage to the Bethesda announcement and also an article that Jim Sterling put up on his site recently. To be clear, I'm limiting this talk to the AAA game industry and how bad products have a tendency to drive good products out of the market. And I'm going to take this one just a little bit slower than I usually do because it's heavy. So how does asymmetry of information progress? Well, it starts off with a situation in which the customer has no way to accurately determine the value of a product until after they purchase it. This creates an incentive for sellers to focus more on lower quality products. Sellers who do indeed have a high quality product have less or no ability to show how their product actually is of a higher quality. Following that is the knowledge from consumers that they can't tell the difference between good and bad, and that they begin to just simply factor that into their buying decisions. And finally, that there's a lack of consumer protection, whether through insufficient regulation or warranties. And here's the parallel to the video game industry, but first be aware that asymmetry of information doesn't mean genuine good products don't exist, just that the consumers can't tell the difference before buying, and the makers of those good products can't charge a premium price as a result of the higher quality. This in turn means that there's little incentive for them to produce higher quality products at all because they have to sell at the same price as everyone else. So, Bethesda just put out a blog post stating that it is now company policy to not provide review code to media outlets until one day before the launch of a title. This is a bit of a wide-sweeping change, which I suspect is the result of the success they enjoyed by doing the same with Doom in a more unofficial kind of way at the time. This is asymmetry of information in action. To coincide with that, and with very odd timing I must say, Jim Sterling made a post on his website about difficulties getting review code from Electronic Arts and Square Enix. Originally he said it might be the PR firm 47 Communications, which I've had issues with myself, but on further research and sources coming forward to chat with him, it was because he was seen as a wild card as far as his coverage is concerned. They couldn't predict whether he would give a good review, and thus elected to not provide review code to him on that basis. Review code being provided to games media one day before release is a terrible thing for consumers. Just be patient and wait for the reviews, right? Well, that argument assumes that games media won't rush the reviews to still hit the release day window, which of course they will. This simply means that reviews will become more superficial, which conveniently is where Bethesda games in particular shine very well. They're amazing on the surface, but if you look under the hood, well, Flying Spaghetti Monster help you because you're nearly guaranteed to find significant problems, even if you're able to look past them and still really enjoy the title. The Jim Sterling light gray listing is just as bad for consumers because he won't be the only one. And if review code is only going out to places that publishers are already sure will give a positive review, then we simply have a feedback loop where reviewers lose their credibility, or consumers believe the hype, which has certainly not been a problem before now, or something like that. And while the level of information on games certainly does improve over time after launch, being limited to post-release content with obfuscating positive reviews from outlets rushing for clicks makes it far more difficult. And since games make the bulk of their money very early on, while the customer has an increasingly difficult time finding genuine information, we encounter a problem. There is a clear incentive for the seller to pass off a low-quality product as a higher one. This has been going on for years. Gamers love hype, we just can't help ourselves. Even the most ardent consumer advocates get caught up in it. For the most part, developers and publishers aren't held to account on quality disparity. See Super Bunny Hop's video on bullshots for a good explanation here. But in short, think of all the times a Watch Dogs-style doctored screenshot or video is put out. Clearly there's an incentive for the seller to pass off lower quality products as though they're higher quality ones, and they've been successfully doing it long enough that proper regulation might not even survive a legal challenge, because this is just how the industry does business now. Following that, on what asymmetry of information does to a market over time, we progress into sellers not being able to really communicate that their product genuinely is of a higher quality. The game industry is dominated by several very large entities. Yes, smaller companies exist, but the vast majority of them are niche or failures. In fact, oligopoly may be the most accurate term to use here. So, in an industry where bullshots are not just standard but expected by consumers, how does a developer that doesn't engage in that behavior manage to compete? How do they communicate that their product really is superior and actually does look that good if they can't compete on marketing budget and the consumers wouldn't necessarily believe the footage isn't doctored anyways, since that's the industry standard? And that leads into the idea of buyers, the gamers themselves, being cynical or pessimistic enough about the quality level of what is in the market that they disregard the quality as an issue. There are certainly issues wherein quality has become a major problem, but they're pretty few and far between, with things like Aliens Colonial Marines and No Man's Sky. But for evidence of the general pessimism of the industry, look no further than games like Watch Dogs, The Witcher 3, Gears of War, and so on, with doctored footage, where gamers will argue that you should have known the screenshots or trailer wasn't representative of the final game, as though marketing accuracy doesn't matter. And finally, asymmetry of information tends to revolve around industries where there's a lack of warranty. We're still without genuine refund policies that actually benefit consumers, with Origin of all things leading the charge. And as the bullshot situation exposes, regulation to protect consumers against poor quality content is decidedly lacking as well. But amid all of that, we receive platitude guarantees of future support in the form of zero-day and launch week patching becoming normal. Season passes, DLC promises, all of which will be dropped the instant profitability slides. So, what happens to the market long-term when you're dealing with asymmetry of information? Well, the premise here is that bad products drive good products out of the market. And I think it's safe to say that the AAA game industry itself, whether only a young market in this respect, certainly exhibits many of the hallmarks. And what have we seen over the past decade? Some aspects have most certainly improved with technology, but at the same time, gamers have to deal with what I perceive as a degraded average level of quality on offer across the AAA market. Content has gotten thinner yet heavily padded, replaced with make-your-own fun, monetized by pushing you away unless you pay more. A bit of a soapbox for sure, but I think it's undeniable that the direction the industry is moving is in an anti-consumer trajectory. And why? Because unlike a free market, the sellers here hold all the cards. Customers have to deal with limited information early on after release, further complicated by developers holding back review information or gray and blacklisting troublemakers, which gets in the way of genuine reviews later on. Publishers have created a system through things like Day 1 and Week 1 patching, content promise, and early access that unfinished or buggy games are expected and just part of gaming. And worst of all, that you can't criticize them as a result. Often gamers need to buy sight unseen with no rental mechanism, poor refund mechanisms, and no consumer protection to speak of for most of us. We become jaded towards the industry, not in a vicious way necessarily, but just enough that gamers often expect videos from E3 to be faked, and even go as far as to argue that deception is no big deal. In fact, I think the price of video games has only remained stagnant because developers have had to pad out games in order to keep the perceived value at $60 US. The asymmetry of information usually results in a lowering of price as buyers become disenfranchised with being misled, but being given more content for the same price is equivalent to receiving normal content for a lower price. Now, some of these tests are a bit fledgling in nature. The more economist-inclined folks in the audience will have identified by now that I've described what is called a market for lemons. It strikes me as an industry which has been approaching market for lemon stature, but that has a little way to go just yet before consumers are sufficiently cynical about the issues that they simply accept it as business as usual for full-blown lemon status to be claimed. That said, it is pretty clear that things like Bethesda announcing the holding back of review code are very bad things for gamers. I mean, for God's sake, they said in the blog post that they want media and gamers to experience the game at the same time. Well, if that's the real reason, then why the one-day early bit, still letting media play early? Because all one-day early does is flood the online media sites with superficial reviews, many of which won't have even had time to finish the game. Their games could turn out great like Doom did with the same review window, but gamers need more information, and there's no circumstance where more information is a bad thing for consumers. And what is the overall effect of asymmetry of information on the game industry? Well, whether you think that Bethesda games are good or not, contribution to a lack of consumer information has a rather inevitable consequence with the market for lemons outcome. How many good-sized quality independents do we have left? And where do the good developers go? into the arms of Electronic Arts, Activision, Ubisoft are out of business because it made more financial sense to leave the market than it does to keep producing high-quality games that you can't sell for what they're worth. And that, friends, is a depressing thought. So, what do you think about the lacking information about games before, at, and sometimes for a reasonably significant period of time after launch? Let's chat about it down below in the comments. I'd apologize for this one being a little on the complicated side, but by now most of you are used to that from me. Feature Creep is a regular show every week. Sub up if I didn't make your head hurt, and if you felt the need to patronize me on patreon.com/Tarmack, you would have my monthly gratitude and a special chat room on Discord. A link to that is in the description. Thanks for watching. That's all I have to say. Tarmack out.